Well, that's quite a lot of thinking for just a glimpse. In fact, when I'm up there doing my Tai Chi, I'm not looking at anything. I might see something, and sometimes it becomes a distraction for a short moment. But then I bring my attention back to my body sensations, to what we call in Tai Chi deep mind, which I think is what people mean when they talk about mindfulness, basically not thinking. It's the same in Zazen, when you literally do nothing and somehow sink into a deeper state of meditation, and you can't make the thoughts not come. And it doesn't work to want them to go away, you just let them pass through your mind. And the Zazen is getting easier for me, I think. I don't have much trouble rising at 6 a.m, and I even manage to keep my back straight without leaning on the radiator. And the routine of Zazen, of Tai Chi and swimming in the sea every morning is literally keeping me from going insane. I haven't drunk for a few weeks now. I'm not saying I'll never drink again. I don't need that. In any case, I don't think it's necessary to be too hard on yourself. Chen Manqing, the Grandmaster who brought Tai Chi to the West, was fond of his whiskey. And Wang Sheng Xian, who surpassed him, loved women. You don't have to shave your head to find yourself, but it helps to get rid of things you don't need. What is left when we stop all that incessant thought? Are we any less? Of course we're not our thoughts. I sincerely hope not, considering all the nonsense that goes through my head. On the contrary, once we work out that there's no self and that we're left with nothing, we are nothing. God is nothing. Love is nothing. Now that's worth living for, I think. It brings new meaning to the phrase good for nothing, which was one of my headmaster's favourites, which he used between smacks to my head. At the end of the Zazen, we recite the following words: numberless beings set free, endless delusion let go, countless dharma see through, peerless way manifest. All pretty self-explanatory, but what I really like is what's said afterwards, and it's this: let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by, and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life. Now, for someone who fairly regularly thinks of killing himself, that's a pretty positive image, and I can't argue with it. You know, men of my age are the most likely to commit suicide. We're looking in the face of old age, and no longer having to provide for a family. We have no purpose. It's worth sitting in silence for 15 minutes with your legs hurting just to hear that mantra, and I'm grateful. It turns out the pursuit of nothing is a noble quest after all. They didn't tell you that at school. I remember when the Dalai Lama was asked what the most positive thing that could be done for world peace, he said that everybody should meditate. And I thought that was pretty silly at the time, because meditating is doing nothing. So how can you bring about positive change by doing nothing? Well, by getting rid of the stuff that you don't need, I guess. And the nothing you are left with is worth more than all the somethings put together. That's the art of Wu Wei, the art of doing nothing. And if the universe is governed by the principles of yin and yang, full and empty, positive and negative, then the Western view that more is always best is pretty silly. Because not only is everything changing constantly, but it's undeniable that more must also create less, and less must create more, as the law of the universe determines that everything must return to equilibrium. And that's also how Chinese medicine works, by using these universal principles to rebalance the body. Whilst in the West, we just wait until we're dying, and then we go to hospital. Perhaps I've had too much coffee this morning. It's Sunday morning in Ramsgate, and the spring sunshine is streaming through my bedroom window, lighting up the whole town, in fact. And it's quiet, delightfully, sublimely quiet. Just the song of the sparrows and the distant sound of Radio 3 playing downstairs in the kitchen from when I went down to make coffee. And yet, it's a happiness and peacefulness that I don't trust entirely, as Van Gogh put it. I find myself listening for someone to fire up a chainsaw, or for an ambulance to turn on its siren, even though there's no traffic on the road. Mind you, they only seem to do it when I'm walking by. I mean, the ambulance siren is so loud, it hurts your ears. It might even cause permanent damage, which kind of defeats the object of the ambulance, which is to save you. In other countries, they use a bell, Here in the UK, it's an alarm, and it's alarming, it's stressful, and the ambulance drivers, who are in one sense our heroes, love switching on the siren, and they love driving fast. I met an ambulance driver years ago, and I was following him in a car in the Yorkshire Dales, and I've never seen anyone drive so fast. It was like he had a death wish. And being a young man and a little stupid, I tried hard to keep up with him, even though I was putting my girlfriend's life in danger as well as my own. He was way ahead, and then a bus came around the corner and missed me by inches. And when we got to the pub, of course we were going to the pub, he was talking about the moment with the bus as if it was the highlight of his week and just what he was looking for. Well, I guess a near miss like that will bring you into the present moment. But meditating is a lot safer. The ambulance siren is a bit like bad news on TV. It's sensationalistic. It could have been designed to stress you out, intended to make you worry. I don't know this for certain, but I imagine that the siren and how many decibels they decided it needed to be in order that everyone could hear it, more about choosing a number than measuring its effectiveness on the human ear. And once we have them, getting rid of them will be impossible because people will see it as a loss. Perhaps we'll have to wait for driverless cars that automatically pull over when there's an ambulance behind them. But things have got to get worse before they get better. If something becomes too yin, it will inevitably become yang. Like pouring cold water on the sauna makes it hotter. COVID forced me to make friends with Ramsgate. When I was spending half the year in New York, Ramsgate wasn't really my home, just somewhere to put all my stuff, somewhere to visit. But with chasing my girlfriend around the US and Europe, and my savings diminished, and things going wrong between us during the lockdown, our plans to get married were forgotten. It's taken me a long time to accept that, although she's probably the most remarkable woman I ever met. She's basically not capable of intimacy, and doesn't want or need a loving relationship. So once back in the UK, I drank and ate too much as a distraction from the pain of separation and the denial of the inevitable. Fortunately, as it turned out, my intuition was way ahead of my mind. And one morning when I was thinking about all the derelict buildings in this beautiful town, I googled conservation projects in Kent. And there was this article about a medieval church under renovation. And I saw who was involved, and a link to a course at Kent University in architectural conservation. I thought, that looks interesting. I think I would enjoy that. And I might actually get to earn some money from it, rather than constantly struggling with trying to get film projects off the ground. Perhaps I could even work for the council as an enforcement officer and discourage people from wrecking listed buildings in a misguided attempt to modernise them. I could play that role, I think to myself. And so I apply and get some people to write me references. And to my complete surprise, even though I don't even have a degree, and I'm very old, I get an offer. One of the modules is designing a plan for the restoration of a historic building, and there are so many to choose from here in Ramsgate. Perhaps I could start to contribute to the regeneration of the town in a practical and meaningful way. Perhaps I could find a building and actually raise the money to renovate it. I could launch a crowdfunding campaign, apply for government grants, form a non-profit company, and attract private investors. Perhaps it could be an arts club, somewhere artists could come and work in studio space, somewhere with accommodation, with a restaurant and bar, where I'd have a tab of course, in a way perhaps not unlike the assembly rooms that these seaside towns were famous for when they were at the height of their popularity some 150 years ago. They were purpose-built in the 18th century for a form of entertainment called an assembly. A large number of guests met together to dance, drink tea, play cards and listen to music, or just walk about and see and be seen. There were lots of them around the country, the most famous being in Bath, celebrated in the novels of Jane Austen. But Ramsgate also had a number, including St George's Hall, and a famous one at the old Albion Hotel that was the favourite of the Duke of Wellington, before the council knocked it down to allow car access to the West Cliff. Coleridge was heard giving poetry readings there, and there were no doubt more dissolute forms of entertainment once the wives had gone home. But today the appeal would be a slightly more practical one, like encouraging arts and crafts, literature and music, and of course saving some of Ramsgate's finest public buildings. However, when I try and apply for my student loan, which I'll most definitely need, not having much more than a few £100s to my name, I get turned down on the grounds of being too old. At my age, I'm regarded as not worth investing in, and since getting that news I have to admit to myself that I'm suffering from a touch of the old black dog, largely because it's slowly dawning on me that I'm getting closer to my old age and death. It's worth pointing out that the government have raised the pension age because we can all live longer and work longer, but evidently not study longer. I've made it to this age in spite of all the cigars and booze that I've been trying to shove into my poor body since my girlfriend started behaving like she didn't love me anymore. Well, it's silly to suggest that any of my problems are anyone else's fault. I'm 60, and my poor old dad only made it to 59. Saturday morning I go down to the posh supermarket, but the queue's around the block, and I don't have the patience for it. It's the same story at the bakery. And so I head up to Addington Street in the direction of the deli. On the way I pass a dilapidated Georgian shop that I saw being cleaned out by the council that day, with a stack of 78s and the foot-long dildo, neither of which are contemporary to the building, but nevertheless give some insight into the lives of the people who lived there since. It might be a good fit for my renovation model on the architectural conservation course, I'm thinking. I'm pretty sure it's owned by the council, but it's not really big enough for housing, and they might even be amenable to me making it into a community project, something that could contribute to the regeneration of the town. And opposite is a youth training centre, and maybe I could rope them into doing some renovation, and to learn the skills that any historic town urgently needs. There are so many empty listed buildings in Ramsgate, any of which would be a great renovation project, like the Dutch gable house at Queen's Court, probably the oldest house in Ramsgate, and left unoccupied for years, and not forgetting the Eagle, the 18th century coaching inn at the end of my road. And there are also 2 buildings on Chapel Place that used to be the Adult Education College, designed by Edward Pugin, the great architect's son, who also designed the Granville Hotel, and reputedly contains a wealth of architectural gems. Directly opposite is a beautiful red brick house built around the turn of the last century and clearly empty. I can make out the tiles of an outdoor swimming pool under one of the polytunnels at the back. These are all really important heritage assets, but how come they're all being left to rot? Sunday morning, and I'm on my way home after my swim. I have that wonderful electric feeling that happens sometimes after being in the cold water, and I'm high on it. The idea of going home is a little depressing compared with the great outdoors, and the house can be dark at this time of day. And I know I need to buy some food, but I don't want to go to the supermarket. I don't want to buy wine. Well, maybe it's okay with Sunday lunch. I bought lamb chops earlier, and a glass of Burgundy would go well with those, but definitely no cigars today. I turn up from the harbour into York Street and somehow veer straight into the tobacconist and ask for a cigar. There's an Indian lady behind the counter. Actually, she's a Tamil from Sri Lanka, basically a refugee from the Civil War. She asks me which cigar I want, and I say, a half Corona please, and point to the wooden case that houses the posh cigars. And she looks a little unsure, as if she doesn't want me to have one, and then I realise it's probably because they don't sell many of them, or not to someone unshaved, wearing a dirty tracksuit and a beanie hat. She fiddles with a cigar for a while, before she reluctantly places it on the counter, and I tap my card thinking she obviously knows what's best for me, even if I don't. And I thank her and start to leave, and see she's staring at the receipt like she's trying to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, and I imagine she's worried she's sold it at the wrong price, and doesn't want to get told off by her boss, or her husband, or both. I feel sorry that I couldn't connect with her, but deep down I think I'm feeling guilty about wasting my money and ruining my health. I exit the shop and pass the homeless guy outside the supermarket, noticing the stack of paperback books he's accumulated, and how comfortable his bedding looks, and thinking it's a miracle that I haven't ended up on the street. I go in and buy a pot of salmon egg caviar and a bottle of Fleury. I open it as soon as I get home, and smoke my cigar while I make lunch, with one ear half waiting for the bank notification to say I've gone into overdraft, not having worked or been paid for nearly a year now. But I feel like treating myself, and there's some jazz on the radio, and I'm thinking what a middle-class life I lead as I go out into my garden for a sprig of rosemary. And I see my neighbour, who's pruning ivy off the old cherry tree. Great, I think to myself. This is my opportunity to talk to her about her trees blocking all the light from my house and garden. But now I've already had a half bottle, so I don't beat around the bush. But I tell her that I don't get any sunshine in my garden, and I'm going to apply for planning permission to put a skylight in my kitchen roof. And the council will inevitably ask me why, and I'm going to have to tell them it's because your yucca palm is blocking all the light, and there are regulations against that. I can visibly see her shrinking, and and I start to feel sorry for her, even though this conversation is all in my head, and I haven't actually said anything yet. But the light really is a problem, and it's beginning to drive me nuts, as well as making me depressed. But I don't wish to scare her, so instead I smile and say we must get together for drinks when the weather improves, and I go back to my cooking with my tail between my legs. And ain't no sunshine when she's gone, on repeat in my head. I eat too much, and somehow also manage a fat slice of the orange and almond polenta cake with Madagascan vanilla that the Polish lady makes, which because I'm so stuffed I have to eat horizontally, like the Romans did. But instead of watching slaves dance and copulate, I watch a movie on Netflix. It's set in the Sino-Japanese War, and there are lots of Asian beauties in it, and Japanese soldiers being cruel to them, which somehow reminds me of my prep school headmaster and my girlfriend being half Japanese. To my surprise, she calls. She's worried about her skiing instructor exam this week, and as usual I tell her that she's fabulous and that she'll sail through it, which I know she will. She mentions something about renting out her house on Airbnb for the summer, suddenly sounding rather awkward. She's going to drive from upstate New York to Arizona and California to see friends, and then stop by Colorado and empty her lockup, which she's been paying for the last 7 or 8 years. And I'm thinking, that's a really long way to go, driving on your own for thousands of miles. And it suddenly hits me that she wants to be on her own. She doesn't want to go with a boyfriend, and she doesn't want to go with me. And I find it kind of depressing, because I did ask her to marry me, and she said yes. And after all the trouble at her house during lockdown with her best girlfriend, she said that she didn't want to break up with me. And I said, okay. Well, now I'm left with that feeling of emptiness, atrophy in fact, which I knew was coming, and I'm thinking, why don't you just end it and move on? You know, according to attachment theory, she is the most damaged of them all, a dismissive avoidant. So you can't fix her, and you have to stop putting yourself last at every turn. So what exactly is the attraction here? Well, I guess I don't actually have to do anything, nothing dramatic anyway. But perhaps I should start to rechannel the attention I've been giving my unattainable girlfriend to my own life. Yes, what about me for a change? But that sounds pretty selfish. I just can't stand selfishness. Van Gogh also had disastrous relationships with women, and so did Coleridge, who basically killed himself with brandy and laudanum and sorrow. But I miss her so much. It's pathetic, I know it is. I imagined that when I got back from the States, with everything that had gone wrong between us, it was probably over, and I stopped calling her. And then she called me and sounded upset, and said that she'd get over it if I finished with her. But I could tell that she was hurting and scared, and so I called her or messaged her every day after that. And then one day I was feeling lonely and seeing clearly that there wasn't any future for us, and that I should let go. And I went round the house and collected together all the things that she'd ever given me, like the Buddhist charms and her love letters and all the stuff that reminded me of her. And I put it all in a parcel and mailed it to her. The same day I got a late Christmas present from her. I'd assumed that she'd forgotten or didn't care, and I lost my nerve, and I messaged her and told her that when she received the parcel, just to put it aside, and I'd tell her when to open it, or if she'd heard that I'd died or something. This was after the dog died, I think, and I knew she was vulnerable, but now she had gotten to know lots of new people there on the mountaintop, and she was okay without me, I mean. And of course she's still very close to her best friend, who will never have a good word for me. I never discovered if it was her or one of her other friends who said she shouldn't marry me because I just wanted to fuck her and wanted her money. Well, if you didn't want to fuck your girlfriend, that would be weird. Anyway, it's just someone being cruel. Because if someone says something like that, it hurts the person they're trying to protect just as much as the person they're trying to hurt. And in any case, saying it doesn't make it true. So coming back from Hastings on the train, more than a little hungover the other day, after my best pal's birthday, I messaged her and asked if we were still lovers, or if we'd moved into the special friends bracket. And I know I kind of asked for it, but she said that we probably had, because of the pandemic, and that if I wanted a relationship with someone else, she'd be okay with that. And I'm devastated and crying and looking at our holiday snaps on the phone. And I can't tell her because she would just say I'm codependent, which may even be true. But she's so cold and avoids intimacy or being held or even touched in bed, unless we're having pokey-pokey, which looking back at it wasn't very often. Whereas I'm the opposite, having been deprived of love as a child and beaten at school, My response is to try and give love, to express it as often as possible. And it's not impossible for these opposite types to be compatible, as ultimately we're looking for the same thing. It's so hard being with a dismissive avoidant. They always think they're right. In fact, they're totally self-reliant, which is another word for isolated. My Yorkshire grandmother had an expression, "There's nowt as queer as folk." She wasn't kidding. Hello? So anyways, she calls me, and I get the impression that she's relieved that I didn't dump her. Because it always hurts, right? Even if you know it's for the best. So when I get her call, I'm actually right outside the house, heading off for a swim, and the sun is shining, and we talk for like an hour about how difficult it is being with selfish people sometimes, and how you have to protect yourself and say no, and sometimes you have to give up on people. It reminds me of what John Donne wrote once, "Be thine own palace, or the world's thy jail." And I say that to her, and she hears me, and I feel so blessed that she gets it. She always gets it, and I'm going to miss that. It's so rare, so difficult to find in anyone, and I wonder if she's the last love I'll ever have, or if it's even possible to love ever again, or even find anybody that I'd want to fuck, or want for their money. My eyes fill with tears of self-pity, and I can't believe I've got so old without growing up, it seems. And the words of the evening Zazen come to me. Let me respectfully remind you that life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by, and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Take heed. Tonight your days are diminished by one. Do not squander your life. And so why have I? Have I though? Have I really squandered my life? I mean, most people are happy just trying to have a good time, or having things like houses, cars and holidays, or getting their kids into a good school. No, I think we create our very own version of heaven and hell for ourselves. The jet black sea heaves and rolls, and the waves crash angrily against the massive granite slabs of the harbour wall. Further out towards the Goodwin Sands, a tall ship rocks from side to side, taking in more and more water, and then suddenly a giant wave picks it up and dumps it onto the sandbank. Slowly and unstoppable, it slides onto its side, accompanied by the screams of the sailors as they tumble from the upright deck into the sea. Up on the west cliff, Augustus Pugin wakes up with a start. He's wet with sweat and has a wild and fearful look in his eyes. Leaping out of bed blindly, he drags his coat over his drenched nightshirt and staggers across the room and up the steps to the tower. He prizes open the little door and pushes his body into the icy wind and sheeting rain. As he raises his telescope to his eye, he can make out the distant cries of the drowning sailors through the maelstrom, but the ship has already been consumed by the waves. In its place is a scene of Bruegelian hell, a massive sprawl of tangled steel and smoking towers and colossal machines with spinning bellies that rush to and from a mountain of grey toxic sludge. Men dressed like masked demons, smeared in excrement, run around the scene shouting at one another, and the corpses of dead seals, dolphins and dogfish litter the scene. Suddenly, a terrible and unearthly din is heard that gets louder and louder until Pugin has to clasp his hands over his ears. And up above, there suddenly appears an enormous white dragon with wings 100 feet long, a massive whale-like belly that never seems to end, and flashing fire from its arse, emitting a sulphurous and suffocating smell. Pugin lets out a terrible scream, and in a fit of madness he begins to pull out his hair and beat his fists against his head, and tears the flesh from his face as he awakes strapped to his bed in the hospital of Bedlam. I have my Tai Chi Zoom on Wednesday evenings. I thought of giving this next series of classes a miss, because I'm short of money. And since I've started playing tennis, my knees have swollen and I've pulled my calf muscle. It's now twice the size of the other one, and I limp around the house like Long John Silver after too much grog. I've enjoyed the tennis, playing in the sunshine with the fresh sea breeze, but given the choice, I'd rather do Tai Chi. I don't want to lose my practice. It's important to me, not only on a physical level, but in bringing the Taoist principles into my everyday life, which sounds a bit pretentious, but really means just being closer to reality, getting in sync with nature and the universe. I tell my teacher about my knee problem during the class and ask how it relates to what Grandmaster Chen Manqing said about investing in loss. The idea that you can actually benefit from your mistakes, learn by getting stuff wrong. In terms of the sore knee problem, if you're not aligned properly, which is an important principle to master in Tai Chi, the pain will soon let you know. And so in that sense, there's a benefit in having sore knees. My teacher also says that investing in loss extends into life in the wider context of the upright man, which is the term Taoists and Buddhists use for someone who practices honesty, humility and compassion, and all the positive qualities of mankind broadly described by the word truth. Of course, it's an ideal that I'll never reach, just in the way that my Tai Chi practice will never get to a very high level, but I like it as a model, and it's what Wallace, the Scottish revolutionary, stood for, and Christ epitomised, and why they're still remembered today. So in spite of my sore knees, and the fact that I'm thinking my Tai Chi is rubbish, and it'd be so much easier to give it up and practice Zazen instead, which on the physical level only really involves sitting upright for a time with your legs crossed, I'm encouraged and inspired by this idea of investing in loss and the concept of the upright man. Halfway through the class, I get a message from my girlfriend. What are you up to? And after the class, I message her back. I'm touched that she's thinking about me. Only the other day I was writing about my lost love and weeping behind my glasses, knowing that we're drifting apart. But I can tell there's something wrong, and she says that she's going to call me when she's spoken to one of her anti-racist friends about something that has happened. Race is obviously a big issue in the US right now, and only last night the cop who killed George Floyd was convicted. My girlfriend, identifying as brown, is understandably wary of the cops, and I can relate to that, having been assaulted by them more than once. But when I share that with her, she says it doesn't count because I'm white, because the police are not going to kill you without good cause, which is evidently not the case if you're black or brown. At least that's the way she sees it. Anyway, she's got involved in this local political group recently, where all members are black or brown or Asian, and basically they don't like white people. She has a sign outside her house which reads, "Hate has no place here," which is an anti-racist slogan, and she goes to the meetings and invites the members around to the house, and all the neighbours are white, and her friends say, "Who are all those white people?" And basically they're racist, but they don't know it. I mean, I'm white, and I'm also a man, and though I've always seen myself on the outside, I am part of the patriarchy, and also privileged, and so I'm basically the enemy of these people, even though I'm trying to expand my consciousness to become an upright man. And if I was political, I'd be a socialist, but I'm not, because I believe politics is over. It turns out that she got a call from her old analyst, who's also a writer of fiction, and one of the more unlikable characters in his book happens to be mixed race, and my girlfriend believes it's based on her, and was very upset, and it's a breach of trust. But she wouldn't let me console her, and there was nothing that I could have said anyway. And she said that if I did say anything, she would hang up on me, and then she shouted at me for the next 30 minutes. When she got sick of it, she said that we had to change the subject, and asked what I'd been doing. And so I told her all about the concept of investing in loss, and what the Taoists meant by being an upstanding or upright man, and explained it was a bit like the principle of being a knight, like in the days of the Cathars, who were priests and vegetarian, and didn't worship in churches, but in the fields, and would help the peasants in their work. And women were regarded as equal, and all the stuff that she says that she believes in. But all she could say was that knights were all racist, and murdered black people in the Crusades. And at that point the signal went on the line, and I went to bed. So this morning when I awake, I'm thinking about how investing in loss relates to the loss of my relationship. I do love her, I mean wholly and completely, like only true love can be. But I can love her without sacrificing myself. And blame is in any case self-destructive. And ultimately, you can only truly take responsibility for yourself. To thine own self be true and all that. I don't need to be right, even if I do know more about the Cathars than she does, and probably a few other things, having had 24 years more experience of life. But I'm still left with an overwhelming sense of sadness and helplessness that I can't help her, and a sense of failure in my promise to love her and protect her. And I'm so sad to think of losing someone who, underneath all the hurt and anger, driven by the left-wing political agenda going on in the US right now, is really a result of her upbringing in a mixed-race family who weren't able to show her love, and who does understand the deeper principles of existence, and the prospect of losing that connection with her leaves a gaping great hole in my soul. So I decided to send these pages to her this morning, and then I changed my mind, because explanations are a waste of time, and so is being right. As the saying goes, never explain, because your friends don't need it, and your enemies won't believe you anyway. Instead, I write, I'm so sorry about your analyst, love. That must have hurt. I'm not sure it's possible to be friends, given their job is to psychoanalyze you. Not like love, where you must accept and love anyway. The greatest thing you will ever learn is to learn to love and be loved in return. I check to see if she's read the message, and see that she has, but hasn't responded. And I know the more I say I love her, the more it pushes her away. So I go off and play tennis with my knees killing me. But my tennis partner is so happy because he's getting it on with a new woman that he really likes. And I must say it's lovely to see that lift his mood and his game. But when I get home, I check my messages, and there's a picture of a book cover that reads, Being Upright, Zen Meditation and the Bodhisattva Precepts, meaning that my girlfriend is telling me that she already knows everything there is to know about being upright, and I suddenly don't feel like an upright man in training anymore, but the old fool in a pack of cards.